Hey guys, I felt compelled to make this short intro to say that this is a longer pre-record than those that I have been creating and uploading. After being a YouTuber for 2 to 3 years, I understand that some people can only watch for so long. But for this video, I thought that it was necessary. There's a short introduction, and then I actually go ahead and read specific passages from John U. Bacon's latest Michigan football book, Overtime. I think it's all important. I think it's all valuable information. Some of it will generate some laughs, but I think it's all germane to this discussion regarding whether or not the University of Michigan is serious about football. So for those of you who watch a little bit, thank you. And for those of you who watch to the end, thank you as well. I just wanted to put this quick disclaimer up front, and go blue. Hey guys, it's been tossed around numerous times right here on Big Discussions 76 Sports between myself, Buckeye Alex, and those of you who have hung out in the chat. And in this video, I want to attack it head on and ask the question: is the University of Michigan serious about football? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Dr. Anwar Youssef Dunbar, and this is Big Discussions 76 Sports. First of all, please like this video, please share it, and please subscribe to my channel. Well, in this video, I want to address the accusation and ask the question: is the University of Michigan serious about big-time college football? Before I jump into that, though, I want to thank everyone who participated in yesterday's live stream in the aftermath of the University of Michigan's men's basketball team's victory over the Ohio State Buckeyes down in Columbus. That live stream was a little bit different in that we started off with the men's basketball team, and then we talked about Joe Milton entering the transfer portal. And then we talked a little bit about the current NBA standings. And then we finished with congratulating Naomi Osaka for her win in the Australian Open. And I noticed the viewership dipped just a little bit when we transitioned over to the NBA. And I know that Michigan football, as of now, it pays the bills here. But I intentionally kept the focus of this channel open so that we could talk about the NBA, and so that we could talk about who the GOAT is, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, or LeBron James, and so that we could, at some points in time, veer off to talk about Naomi Osaka winning the Australian Open. And it was cool because we had myself in the live stream, Alex, Herb from Niagara Falls, and then we had a window open with Naomi gushing over her trophy and smiling at us. So that was kind of cool. But the other cool thing was that it seemed like we're starting to create a culture here. And what I mean by that is, going back to the summertime, I created a video discussing my influences. And one of my main influences was the Pimp in the Box, Van Smack himself, Jim Rome, the leader of all the clones. And you know, the Jim Rome show is not just a sports show, it's also a bit of a comedy show, and that's part of my style. And for the Jim Rome show, there are regular clones who participate. So if you watch that show, if you listen to the show, then you're familiar with names like Blaze and Casey, and Carl from Rosemead, and Terrence from Sierra Madre, and Shawnee the Cablinasian. You're familiar with those names, and you're familiar with all of the jokes and the running subplots to that show. Sports shows should be fun, and there should be comedy built in, and it's not just about the sports, but it's also about the culture and the personalities that are participating. The same thing is true, or was true, when I was a student at the University of Michigan with the Ticket 1050 WTKA. You had callers who called in every day, like Marcus and Dee and Linda from Grand Blanc, and True Blue Tom and Greg from Saginaw. I'm sick of it, And you had just a culture, and you had regular participants, and we've got that now. We've got Dre, we've got James Lepic, we've got Wolf 58, we've got who else? We've got Buckeye Alex coming up onto the broadcast with me. We've got Abdul Gaines hanging out in the chat, bringing his fire and brimstone and his passionate takes. And that's one of the things I appreciate about Abdul Gaines. And so if you hear me starting to mention names, these are the people who are regular participants and regular visitors to the channel. And I appreciate you guys, because you guys are helping the channel grow. Another one is Yakov 22 and Treppa Coles. So we've got a whole crew of people now coming and hanging out over here at Big Discussions 76 Sports. And yesterday's show, before I go, kind of reminded me of the Dan Le Batard show, which I enjoyed, especially when he had Poppy on and Bomani Jones. Sports, comedy, and culture. So let's go back to Abdul Gaines. I mentioned him a lot. I tease him a lot with the Rashawn Gary picture, and I tease him a lot with Laker Smack. Me and Abdul Gaines go back to high school. He's from Buffalo. He's a Buffalo kid just like me, and he's very passionate. He's just very, very passionate about his sports, and he's got these very, very strong takes. And so one of the things Abdul has said regularly is that the University of Michigan is not serious about football. So I'm going to use that as a jumping off point to talk about whether or not the University of Michigan is serious about football. So let's get to it. So to help us through this discussion about whether or not the University of Michigan is serious about football, I'm going to use Overtime, written by John U. Bacon. I've discussed this book on my channel before. It's a good read. It's a fast read. It's taking me about 2 to 3 years to read because I have so many projects going on. But I'm getting down to the end of the book, and chapter 32, I just read it recently, and there are some things in chapter 32 that I think are really, really germane to this discussion about whether or not the University of Michigan is serious about football. Keep in mind that John U. Bacon is considered to be the official historian of Michigan sports, particularly the football team. But also keep in mind that he's had his eye on the entire Power 5 football landscape. So he's talked to players and coaches at Penn State and Northwestern, and he has his finger on the pulse of what's happening down in the SEC, in the Pac-10. I'm sorry, the Pac-12 and the ACC and those kinds of things. So speaking of the SEC, let's start with one of Abdul Gaines's favorite coaches. This comes from chapter 32, which is entitled Hard to Beat the Cheaters. And this chapter opens up with the discussion of Abdul Gaines's favorite coach from the SEC, none other than Saint Nick Saban. Michigan's win over the Spartans, coupled with Ohio State's stunning loss to Purdue, nudged the Wolverines one crucial spot up to number 5 in both polls. More important, The first official college football playoff poll came out that week, starting Michigan at number 5-2. Because third-ranked LSU, which was 7-1, had to play undefeated, top-ranked Alabama the coming weekend, the Wolverines could sit back during their bye week and watch one of those two teams lose, knowing they would likely move up to the all-important fourth spot without tying their cleats. So this was during the Revenge Tour season, the 2018 Revenge Tour season, which crashed and burned down in Columbus and then in the bowl game. So the players were rewarded with a few more days off, but recruiting never rests. An old coaching maxim, Jimmys and Joes will beat X's and O's every time, meaning great recruits will beat great coaches. An oversimplification, surely. Who doesn't love to see top talent get out-coached? But if you recruit poorly, you'll never compete. You can make a good case that Alabama head coach Nick Saban's success has depended more on recruiting than coaching. When he coached at Michigan State from 1995 to 1999, his recruiting classes were never in the top 10 of Tom Lemming's lists, the only service that ranked recruiting classes at that time. In Saban's first 4 years in East Lansing, his teams went a very unimpressive 25-22-1, never finishing higher than 5th in the 11-team Big Ten until his 5th season, a breakout year when the Spartans went 9-2. In East Lansing, Mark D'Antonio has done far better. That was when Lloyd Carr split the duties between Tom Brady and Andrew Henson. We could have won that game. But State also had Plaxico Burress and T.J. Duckett. But Saban wisely took advantage of his one very good season and rode it to LSU, where recruiting is much easier. 3 of his first 4 full recruiting classes at LSU finished in the top 5, a far cry from his classes at MSU. Likewise, his 5 LSU teams had 4 good years on the field, from 8-5 to 10-3, and one great season, 2003, when the Tigers went 13-1 and won Saban's first national title over the Ohio State University. That's not in the book, by the way, but that's who they beat. When Saban accepted the Miami Dolphins offer, he discovered how effectively the NFL's draft system and salary caps prevent teams from leveraging large talent gaps. His 2005 Miami team went 9-7, and his 2006 team finished 6-10, last in the AFC East division and 4 games behind the New England Patriots, one of the few franchises able to create lasting success, with Tom Brady at quarterback. That's not in the book. Lesson learned. Saban took over Alabama's program the next year. Of his 12 Crimson Tide recruiting classes, 7 in a row ranked number 1 in the nation. A staggering level of success that has fueled 5 national titles in 11 years. That drop, I'm not going to be the Alabama coach. I'm tired of you guys talking, or I'm tired of you guys asking me about this. That was classic. They kept playing that over and over again. That was a funny drop. And he wound up going to Alabama. What's the difference? Recruiting. In fairness, the SEC schools have some inherent advantages over their Big Ten counterparts. Economic power has been leaking from the Rust Belt to the Sun Belt for decades, and with it, population and resources. The weather is better, and the South's sports culture is centered squarely on football, not diluted among basketball, hockey, and soccer as it is in the North. The South supports 7-on-7 spring football leagues, virtually unheard of in the North, and more substantial high school football programs that attract and develop better coaches. Further, the Big Ten supports 28 varsity sports, with the average member funding 24 varsity teams. Michigan and Ohio State field teams in all 28 Big Ten sports, plus a few outside the Big Ten. The SEC sponsors only 21 sports, with the average SEC school fielding only 19, which allows SEC athletic directors to focus on football in a way Big Ten athletic directors cannot. Of the Big Ten's 14 schools, 4 favor basketball over football, while only one SEC school, Kentucky, would claim that. SEC teams also play only 8 league games and notoriously soft non-conference schedules. Abdul Gaines talks about that all the time. Finally, all but one of the Big Ten's 14 schools are members of the prestigious Association of American Universities, considered the top 62 research universities in North America. Of the SEC's 14 schools, only 2 qualified until Texas A&M and Missouri left the Big 12 for the SEC in 2012. While the Big Ten's resources fund everything from more Olympic sports to research, the SEC makes no bones about focusing on football. The league's emphasis is manifest in its willingness to allow member schools to do things Big Ten schools cannot. This has included a practice called oversigning, in which a coach will not just offer but sign more recruits to national letters of intent than he has scholarships to give, then run a quasi-tryout during August camp to eliminate the lesser players from contention. In 2008, when reporter Ian Rappaport asked Saban how he planned to handle having more signed recruits than he had scholarships, Saban responded in part, "It's none of your business." All right? And don't give me this stuff about fans need to know, because they don't need to know. Don't even ask. All right? When Mississippi's Houston Nutt signed 37 prospects in 2009, when the NCAA only had 25 scholarships, even the SEC couldn't abide by it, passing a league rule limiting the number of signed recruits to 25. But that hasn't stopped Saban, who signed almost twice as many recruits in 2013 as he had scholarships, then winnowed the candidates through shortcomings in the classroom or the community, encouraging lesser recruits to delay their enrollment, a practice called gray shirting. Coincidentally, Alabama does wear gray shirts under their uniforms. Or listing injured players as medical red shirts, which don't count against the total. Many backups, seeing the writing on the wall, voluntarily opt to transfer for a better chance of starting, which helps solve Saban's problem, so long as Saban can get the number of scholarship players on the roster down to 85 before the season opener. He has not violated the NCAA or the SEC rules. Add it all up, Nick Saban, mediocre at Michigan State, 5-time national champion at Alabama. This next passage goes back to Bo's days and discusses Jeff George. For those of you who followed Illinois football or followed AFC East football in the NFL, you guys know who Jeff George was. He got drafted by the Colts, and so sports fans like me and Abdul Gaines, who grew up watching the Buffalo Bills, know who Jeff George was. But this is a very interesting passage, and I thought this is worth noting, and it's kind of funny too. Boiled down, the recruiting process is simple. Figure out which players you want, then try to get them. But both steps require a few dozen subtasks each. If you want to do it Michigan's way, the first step is the most important and the most complicated. During the 1985 season, Harbaugh's redshirt junior year at Michigan, he completed his journey from the outskirts of college football, where he almost went unnoticed, to center stage by leading the Wolverines to a number 2 final ranking. That same fall, 5 hours away in Indianapolis, a high school senior quarterback named Jeff George was basking in all the recruiting attention Harbaugh never received. George won the first Gatorade National Player of the Year award and the Dial Awards as the National High School Athlete of the Year in any sport. Dozens of coaches beat the trail to George's door, including Schembechler, who didn't name George in our book, but I will now. Thanks to the work of Harbaugh and company that season, Schembechler told me we thought we might have a shot at Jeff George. But when we got there, this kid was slumped in his chair. He didn't bother to get up and shake our hands. And he started barking at his mom to get him a pop or something. And she ran into the kitchen to get it for him. Boy, that wasn't the way my mom did it. It didn't take long for me to realize this boy might have been blessed with a golden arm, but he was also cursed with a nickel head. After just 30 minutes, Schembechler had seen enough, nodded to his assistant coach, thanked the family for their time, then got the hell out of there. Jeff George went to nearby Purdue for his freshman year, but when the coach who recruited him, Leon Burnett, resigned, George transferred to Illinois. He put up great numbers, but tended to alienate his coaches and his teammates wherever he went. After the Indianapolis Colts picked him first overall in the 1990 draft and gave him a record contract, his 4 Colts teams compiled a 21-43 record before Harbaugh arrived the next year. For the rest of his 13-year career, George would get traded, took off new coaches and teammates, then get traded again. He often put up good numbers, but never came close to the Super Bowl. Schembechler liked to point out George never won a Big Ten title either, unlike every quarterback we've had here at Michigan. That long list includes Jimmy Harbaugh. Jim ended up being twice as good, in my book, as the Golden Arm. Harbaugh was the Big Ten MVP his senior year, and Jim's teammates liked him. Maybe Harbaugh didn't have half the arm of the Golden Boy, but he had twice the brains and 10 times the heart. Give me those specs any day. Harbaugh would remember that lesson. If you want to make Michigan great and make yourself great, this is a great place to be, Harbaugh told me. The ones you have to oversell what we have to offer, you know it's not going to work. If you don't get the appeal of this program, of a Michigan education, of the kind of camaraderie you get working with like-minded people, well, I don't know what to tell you. You'll probably be happier somewhere else, and maybe we will be too. Harbaugh also dislikes the specialization trend, preferring multi-sport athletes. I thought this was interesting, because when I was in high school sports, I only focused on basketball. We asked him, why aren't you playing basketball or track or baseball? Harbaugh said, oh, our basketball team is terrible. It's horrible. Great, then you can start. Or they're too good. Great, then you can learn. Their attitude is, if they're not going pro at something, why do it? That's criminal. Harbaugh cited some statistics off the top of his head. Of the first 32 players drafted by the NFL in 2018, 27 played at least 2 sports and 23 played 3. I think the lesson is pretty obvious. Athletes want to play. Competitors want to compete. Those are the guys we want. Jim's dad Jack added, when I hear someone say I'm concentrating on football, an alarm goes off. That might not be the guy you want. Playing football for Michigan is a tremendous gift you can give to yourself and your family, Jim told me. Just picture the parents of all these players boring the shit out of their neighbors, telling them, our son's going to Michigan. He's playing for the football team. He's working harder than he ever has, and he might even get into the game. Bet you say that a lot. Look at the parents of Navy SEALs or West Pointers. Your kid's a cadet at Army. That's a tremendous gift you can give your parents. So there are some other parts to this chapter. It focuses on Matt Dudek, who, if I recall correctly, is at the time of this book was the head of recruiting. So they talk a lot about things he looks for. Some of the things they talked about was whether or not there was a new vehicle in the driveway, when they pull up to recruit a kid, and also if the parents are asking for things you see in the movies like Blue Chips or geez, what was that movie with anyway, those things you see in the movies. So Michigan looks to avoid certain kids and certain families and certain parents. There's also a little bit here about Lamar Woodley. I'm just going to read this paragraph. In this business, you don't have to investigate the cheaters to find these stories. They wash up on your shore unbidden. All the coaches, players, recruiting coordinators, and reporters know the stuff without even trying. When Michigan's Lamar Woodley entered the Pittsburgh Steelers locker room, still carrying his Nike bags and battered Velcro wallet from college, his new teammates laughed and asked why Michigan players didn't get Gucci bags like they did. Okay, so I'm going to skip to the last passage of this chapter because this video is going kind of long. But I think all of this is necessary to get to the question of whether or not Michigan takes football seriously. So this final passage reads as follows. Where does that leave the coaches and players who aren't cheating? On the outside looking in trying to do it the hard way and getting no credit from the NCAA or the media, in this bizarre world where the guilty are praised and the innocent are punished, perhaps the biggest surprise is that some coaches still try to play by the rules anyway, and some players turn down illicit money to play for them. But how doubly delicious it is when an honest program actually beats the cheaters. When I mentioned all this to Dudek, he shrugged. I was not telling him anything he didn't already know. You hear rumors, was all he said. But he hears far more than that, since Michigan and the programs that pay players occasionally battle for the same recruits, such as Rashawn Gary. In this cynical age, it's stunning that Michigan can win some of those recruiting wars, but generally only when the parents want something more lasting for their son than a handout. When Michigan was recruiting against a school that paid players a few years ago, Michigan's point man on the recruit, an assistant coach, returned from his trip dejected. He pulled down the recruit's magnet from the board and tossed it into the trash can. What happened? A colleague asked. New car in the driveway, the assistant said. We're not going to get him. It's also possible to cheat legally. In 2015, the NCAA started allowing schools to pay student athletes full cost of attendance, which includes travel, food, laundry, and other expenses not covered by scholarships, which pay for tuition, room and board, a long overdue reform praised by all sides of the equation. Before the rule passed, admissions departments had already been calculating the full cost of attendance to establish federal guidelines for all students. Michigan's admissions office reported that for out-of-state students, the full cost of attendance averaged an additional $2,400 per term. After the NCAA rule passed, because our school has integrity, Steve Connolly added, the figure remained the same. Meanwhile, in the Southeastern Conference, once the NCAA passed this provision, Alabama determined that their full cost of attendance for out-of-state students suddenly became $5,386, or 34% more than they'd claimed the year before. You can't tell me, Connolly said, that all of a sudden it became 34% more expensive to drive to Tuscaloosa. But Alabama's figure wasn't even the highest. Auburn claimed a bigger jump to $5,586, while Tennessee calculated an additional $5,666 per term, the highest in the nation. Why it costs 136% more to travel to Knoxville than Ann Arbor is a mystery, especially when Michigan has far more students traveling from both coasts. You can't tell me it's a coincidence that all three schools experienced a sudden spike in the actual cost of attendance, Connolly added. You're giving these programs another advantage over our recruiters. Basically, those schools can give their players $3,000 more per semester than we do. Is it legal cheating? You tell me. Look, Dudek said, We know there are people who don't operate on the same moral plane that not only Michigan expects, but Coach Harbaugh demands. So the last thing I'm doing is going down that rabbit hole. Probably the safest way to get fired around here. The good news is we so rarely go so far down a path with a guy whose character we're not sure about that we get to a point where the kid or his family asks for a bag of money. I've never had anyone directly ask me for anything. If they're going to do that, they probably don't consider us very long. In 2018, the recruiting cycle would peak the coming week at the Penn State game when the corridors of Schembechler Hall would be teeming with 81 recruits in for visits. Most of them A-list prospects Michigan would love to sign. Once Harbaugh, Dudek, and their staffs determined who among the 81 players was mostly likely to fit in as Michigan men, all they had to do was beat the cheaters. So, I'm not going to say much more than that. I think all of that, which John U. Bacon eloquently captured, is pretty self-explanatory. So, is Michigan serious about college football? I'm going to end with that question and ask you guys what you think in the comments section below. This video, I think those are all important things to think about as we're arguing back and forth about whether or not Michigan is serious about football. We've given Jimmy the beat down here. We've questioned his ability, his and his staff's ability to develop talent. I've questioned their scheming in terms of X's and O's in the biggest games. I'm thinking about that 2018 Revenge Tour game down in Columbus. But there's also the recruiting aspect, and according to what John U. Bacon captured in his book, there are things that schools like Bama and Auburn and Tennessee are doing that, and there are ways that they're operating that the majority of the Big Ten institutions aren't or can't. So let me know what you think below. Go blue. And as always, remember that your attitude determines your altitude. Take care, and I'll talk to you the next time. Bye-bye.